afternoon. Welcome to our show. I'm your host, Melissa Ridgen. Before we get started, we want to take a moment to honor a prominent Indigenous leader and elder from Manitoba who's featured in that show opening reel that you just saw. If you're viewing, if you're listening, you obviously didn't see it. He's the elder who is receiving a headdress. Joseph Metcalfe was a respected elder and an Indigenous activist and a war veteran from Saizi Dene First Nation. He passed on this weekend at 77, and our thoughts are with his loved ones. You are what you eat is kind of never more true than for Indigenous people who are intrinsically connected with the water and the land, and from that water and land, of course, is what we eat. Today, we are putting food sovereignty in focus. We want you to join in our conversation. Our phone lines are open. You can call us toll-free at 1-877-647-2786. You can also tweet us at APTN InFocus. Welcome, of course, to our listeners on Element Radio in Toronto at 106.5 FM and in Ottawa at 95.7 FM. Before I introduce you to our guest, let's go to Alberta, where the age-old tradition of food sharing is under attack. A Métis man in northern Alberta faces charges for accepting fish from a First Nations man. Alberta Fish and Wildlife say that First Nations people can't share harvested food with anybody who isn't a family member. APTN's Tamara Pimentel visited the community of Fort Chipewyan to show us how things have worked there until the provincial government decided that it needs to change. Let's watch.
Fort Chipewyan is one of Alberta's oldest settlements and is home to the Dene, Mikisew, Cree, and Métis. The northern remote hamlet sits on the shores of Lake Athabasca, one of the community's main source for food. Here, fishing is a way of life, and sharing harvested food between First Nations and Métis, well, it's always been done.
People enjoyed sharing with each other because at some point they'd run across you again and they'd share something with you, so there was always a continuous giving and taking.
We help one another. Since I can remember, since I was a child, my grandfather did that, but so was my parents did the same, and I did that since I was young.
But the community of Fort Chip is on edge because Alberta Fish and Wildlife have laid charges against a Métis for accepting fish from a First Nations man. In March 2018, Lee Larussa, a Dene man from Fort Chip, gave Kenton Klein, who served as president of the Athabasca Métis Local, 22 whitefish and 20 bags of walleye. Larussa says he gifted the fish to Klein for helping him out, but Klein was caught with the fish and was charged with 8 counts under the Federal Fisheries Act and provincial fishery regulations for accepting the fish. According to Alberta Fish and Wildlife, fish caught under the authority of a treaty right are only able to be shared with family members of the individual who caught the fish and may not be gifted to any other persons who are not also an Indian. Dwayne Roth is Klein's lawyer and represents the Fort McKay Métis Nation.
Kenton has been going up to Fort Chip for many, many years. He knows a lot of people in the community. You know, sharing of food between Aboriginal peoples is not that uncommon up here.
Larussa is also facing charges for fishing without an Indian domestic fishing license. Both he and Klein cannot speak with media while their case is before the court, so we went to Fort Chipewyan to get reaction from residents. Raymond Larussa is a First Nations Métis elder and former commercial fisherman who lived in Fort Chip his whole life.
It's shameful, to try to charge the people, I disagree with that. Let us live the way we lived. We never bother anybody. We help one another. What if I went up south, somewhere out in the city, and there's a white man that's hungry there, just have nothing for his family? I can't give him some fish to feed his family? That's totally wrong,
Robert Granjam is Cree. He has a net on Lake Athabasca, which he pulls regularly to feed his family and his dog team.
They put in so many laws now that affect the traditional way of life. It's actually illegal to share anything or give anything away anymore. Like, that's not our law. Why is it that something by another nation is another group of people is infringed on somebody's way of life? It's really not fair.
But Granjam also says there needs to be some boundaries when it comes to harvesting.
We should not be allowed to kill 15 moose a year. It's our right to do so, but we should not be allowed to, because we've evolved as a human species to take and take and take. We don't know when to stop. We've become a very greedy nation.
Roth says in Alberta there has not been a case that has been successful in establishing Métis rights, whether that be for hunting and fishing or having a say in oil development activity. But this case could do just that.
To have that precedent out there that there is these Métis rights in the heart of the billion-dollar oil sands industry will change the dynamic. It will provide Métis communities with a bit more leverage when it comes to dealing with oil sands industry, because they will be able to say, well, here's a case that establishes that we have Aboriginal rights in this area.
A portion of the cost for this case will be covered by the Fort McKay Métis Nation, who is donating Roth's time. 23 trial days have been set aside for early 2020. Tamara Pimentel, APTN National News, Fort Chipewyan.
Joining us now is Dwayne Roth. He's the lawyer representing Kent and Klein, who is the Métis man who accepted 22 whitefish and 20 bags of walleye last March from Lee Ledexer, who is Dene. The fish was a thanks for helping him out, and it's kind of standard custom among Indigenous people to do this. Dwayne, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So why is this suddenly an issue?
Well, I don't think it's been suddenly an issue. It's been a long time coming. There have been, at least that I know of, 5 other cases of Métis people being charged in Northeast Alberta. In each instance, the Crown dropped the charges before it did go to trial. And this is another one where Métis people, I feel, are being harassed for trying to exercise their rights. And so we do have to mount a defense whenever this happens and try to defend the rights of our people.
So is your opinion of this that it's the conservation department that's harassing the Métis people, and then by the time it gets to court, the Crown's kind of can throw their hands up and say, look, just leave them be, they're doing their thing? Is that how it's shaking down in Northern Alberta?
I think that's pretty much what the gist of it is. I think if one of these cases were to make it to court, and a judge were to make a ruling, it would be very helpful for everybody because it would provide that guidance and that clarity. Right now, there is no clarity. There are, of course, First Nations and treaty rights that are recognized, but the Métis rights up here are not recognized. There is no consultation policy, for example. There's a harvesting policy that leaves a lot to be desired. And just today, as a matter of fact, I got a call from another Métis individual down in the Buffalo Lake Métis settlement who has also recently been charged. So, our people are being charged illegally or, without due course. And I think it's about time that we did get something before the courts so we can answer this once and for all.
So we're actually hoping that that the charges aren't dropped in this, maybe this would be the precedent center that needs to happen to solve this.
Well, we're spending upwards of $200,000 on the defense of this case. So, and we've done that for another case. So clearly, it doesn't do anybody any good with that resources into hiring the expert witnesses and so doing all of the historic study only to have it dropped. I mean, we're hopeful that this one will go all the way.
So, Alberta's not alone in this. In Saskatchewan, we have a conservation officer who spent 1.5 years undercover to catch a First Nations man who sold him $90 worth of fish. Do you feel that the food sovereignty and Indigenous harvesting rights are under attack here by conservation officials? Is this what it looks like?
Well, surely there's got to be a better way than harassing and spending public resources. I know in this case, they even sent the fish out for DNA forensic testing to prove what kind of fish they were. So it just doesn't make sense to spend all this money, both sides. Like I said, spending $200,000 to establish these rights. The First Nations person actually that gave the fish to my client is also being charged. It'd be better to have charges or these rights recognized and have a better agreement with government and justice, to recognize Aboriginal sovereignty over food and let us perhaps decide what's the best interest of our communities as far as conservation. so forth goes.
Well, and that's, I mean, I think the argument that I've heard in both in Saskatchewan and in Alberta about this is, well, this is all about conservation. We're just protecting the stock, the food stocks, and that's why we're charging this guy for selling $90 worth of fish, or we're charging this guy for sharing some of his fish harvest with somebody who had helped him out. The argument to this is that it's about conservation. Do you buy that?
No, not at all, because there is a principle in law that Aboriginal treaty rights are paramount, and as so long as they're handing out fishing licenses, allowing non-Aboriginal access to the fishing stock as well, I think that doesn't make any. It doesn't wash with the conservation. If it was about conservation, it would cut out the sport fishing and other types of fishing, or they cut out the Aboriginal fishing.
Yeah. So we had actually put a poll question out on Facebook and Twitter asking our viewers, do you have regular access to your traditional foods? I mean, if we're talking in the context of conservation and us, raping and pillaging the land, apparently. Let's see what people say. Do you have access to your traditional foods? Well, only 24% said they do. 76% say no, they don't. So, I mean, I guess that kind of suggests that we got to make sure that nobody is overfishing or overhunting. That the poll seems to suggest that wouldn't be much of a problem. So what's at stake, I guess, then, Dwayne, if you guys lose this case?
Well, I guess it would be a very significant blow to the Métis community up here. However, we are fairly confident that we can establish that the Métis meet the proper test that's been laid out by the courts to establish Métis rights. For example, they have a cutoff date of what they call the British assertion of sovereignty. And up here, for sure, like you have Fort Chip that was founded in 1786. So that was long before the Crown was up here and they effectively changed the way of life of the Métis here, which they, in our case, they say was around 19. So in the 1800s, trade, of course, up and down the Athabasca, there was a lot of Métis activity, and they are related to First Nations people up here, and it's always sharing the way.
Yeah.
So we're hopeful we won't lose, and we're confident we're not going to lose, but I guess if we do, we will have to cross that bridge when we get there.
When are you guys back in court?
This matter is set for trial in St. Albert Provincial Court in February of 2020.
Okay, well, it's something we, of course, over here at APTN and everywhere else in Indian country are going to be watching and see how it unfolds. Good luck.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us. So we are going to take a quick break here now. When you stick around, we are going to come back with Canada's new food guide. What does it mean to Indigenous people, to people who are living on fixed incomes, low fixed incomes, and people who are living in the north? How is it different than the Indigenous food guide that came out a decade ago? That's after the break for our viewers and our listeners on Element Radio in Toronto at 106.5 FM and in Ottawa at 95.7 FM. Stay with us. Join our conversation now. You can call in toll-free at 1-877-647-2786. Like and watch us live on the APTN News Facebook page. Follow and tweet us at APTN InFocus. And send your thoughts in an email to infocus@aptn.ca. Welcome back. Let's go to social media now to hear what some of you are saying about the right to food sovereignty. We asked the question, why should First Nations, Métis and Inuit have the right to hunt and harvest foods from the land? Eileen says because white refined food, processed foods are making us sick with diabetes, high cholesterol, levels of heart disease, cancer, stomach diseases, and obesity. Darlene says before the lands were discovered, here, hang on, let's get to Darlene over here. Darlene says, before the lands were discovered, this was a normal thing to do, to eat off the land, to give back to it, to respect given to the land, but take and give back. Thorcy says, Language education through harvesting traditional food and cultural activities on the land is the best way to preserve and maintain identity using nature. And then we asked another question. What are some of the traditional foods from your territory? We have Amy, who says the herbs are often forgotten and are just as important, not only as medicine, but also as nourishment. Most old recipes never specified seasoning because it was unnecessary. And we've got sabocat, water lily root, bulrush shoots, fiddleheads, wild rice, cranberries, smooth rock tripe, reindeer moss, maple and birch syrup, blueberries, raspberries, strawberries, wintergreen berries. That's some of the traditional foods back in Sabocat's neck of the woods. If you would like to add your opinion to the topic of our conversation, here's how you do that. Join our conversation now. You can call in toll-free at 1-877-647-2786. Like and watch us live on the APTN News Facebook page. Follow and tweet us at APTN InFocus. And send your thoughts in an email to infocus@aptn.ca. Joining me now in studio is Kayla Farquhar. She's a diabetes integration project dietitian with the First Nations Health and Social Secretariat of Manitoba. That's a mouthful.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, before the break, we were talking about accessing traditional foods and sharing those foods and traditional foods and how it's important to overall physical health and emotional well-being. So I guess there's a belief that, diabetes and obesity, all of these things didn't exist pre-contact. Do we know if that's true? If you dial it back to everybody's traditional diet, way of living on the land, were we healthier back then?
I think back then, yes, when we, ate traditional foods, and it was also very physical work, right? So we were very physically active then, and now we live much more sedentary lifestyles. And I don't think that there was diabetes and obesity and things like that affecting our lives, and so I would guess that it has a lot to do with what we're eating, right? So.
Well, and there's been such a movement away from, particularly the closer you are to urban settings, you're further away from your traditional diet in a lot of ways. What are some of the challenges that you, as a dietitian, deal with every day in terms of the health effects of bad diets in Indigenous populations?
Sorry, can you just repeat?
So what are some of the health effects that you see on a regular basis as a result of poor diets within Indigenous populations?
Yeah, so there's lots of chronic diseases, of course. I think the most common one that people think about, especially in Indigenous communities, would be diabetes, right? So First Nations people, for example, are 3 to 5 times higher rates of diabetes than the general Canadian population. And there are many other chronic diseases that are prominent as well. And you can definitely see those, the differences, right? And so even diabetes has chronic diseases associated with it, like chronic kidney disease and heart disease. And so with such high rates of diabetes, you can then I guess connect that those ones will also be high as well.
What are the challenges that you have of getting people to re-examine how they eat?
Well, I think just behavior change is just really hard. So everyone wants to be healthy. People generally aren't just, wanting to not be healthy, but change is just very hard. And then of course there's a lot of barriers that people face. And so some examples in the north would be the high costs of foods, of course. I think everywhere in Manitoba, or most places, traveling sometimes is difficult as well to some of the stores. A lot of First Nations people don't have vehicles. And the cost for a taxi is very expensive and just adds to that food bill that they have, right? So those kinds of things are, of course, issues, but there's also issues with accessing traditional foods.
Well, and is that getting better? I mean, I don't know if it's happening more and there's more discussion around getting back to traditional eating, or if there is more of that chatter, or if I've just noticed it more. But does it seem to you that there's a bigger pull to be getting back to those country foods, as they're called?
I think so. Like they're, especially talking about food sovereignty, I think there's a lot more programming around food sovereignty and kind of that push towards it, which I think is really important. And of course, traditional foods are very important, not only culturally, but nutritionally as well, right? They generally include lean traditional meats that are high in iron and other vitamin and minerals. They also include fibrous fruits and vegetables and good fatty fish. So we want to include traditional foods as much as we can. That being said, it is going to, we're not going to be able to go 100% back to traditional foods. We have to kind of consider that store-bought foods are going to be a part of our lives. But I think if people can include it in their diets, then I think that's a good thing.
I think that, not everybody knows somebody who hunts or fishes or traps for us to have access to those foods. And then, like we just heard in the first block, if you do know somebody who hunts or fishes or traps and they share, their bounty with you, well, the government crawls up your butt with charges, sends a conservation officer after you, or you land up in court for sharing fish with somebody who had helped you out. So, we look and go, there's a movement towards a desire to wanting to get back to those traditional foods. We don't all have access to it. And then if you happen to know somebody who does, well, shame on you if you utilize it. So what are there people in your industry, are you looking at ways to increase people's access to traditional foods? Like, I don't know if that would be through, or communities doing this. Is there, more of a, like, let's go out and do a big fish, or let's do a big hunt and get more food sharing somehow in a loophole of some sort? Like, is there chatter out there that's along this line?
Yeah, there's definitely good programs out there that do that, like community gardening, right? I think you're talking about that later.
Yeah.
But that's one example of sort of food sovereignty or berry picking, that kind of thing. There's definitely community hunts and then community freezer programs. So I think, there are people out there doing that and pushing for those kinds of projects. But
God help them if the conservation officers are watching right now. Let's not mention what communities are doing.
Yeah, exactly.
We don't need that hassle. These people. Okay, so I want to talk a minute about the new food guide. So much awaited food guide comes out. You see it? What's your response as a dietitian?
Yeah, well, I think that the new Canada's Food Guide is really that. It's a guide, right? So as it's always been, it's kind of a guide, a good public health tool for us to use to promote healthy eating and really get people to think about healthy eating and to help prevent those chronic diseases that we talked about. But it's not going to answer everybody's nutritional needs, right? So it does, I think, a good job of giving that general overview for the general population. There isn't an Indigenous food guide out right now.
There was one before, so
yes.
Right? There was one that was out, like, I want to say 2007.
I think it was, yeah.
So could you be living on, using that one as your guide, or should you be using this new one as your guide?
So I did hear that they are still recommending that for the Indigenous populations to use the old guide for now.
Okay.
But they are working on a new one as we speak, I guess. I don't exactly know when that's coming out. But I do really like that the new guide talks about more of the way that we eat rather than just the foods that we eat.
How so?
So the new guide actually talks about things like cooking together, just cooking at home in general, sharing food as much as we can, I suppose.
Sharing food, but not while conservation officers are watching you.
Not traditional foods, I guess.
Ridiculous. Every time I hear that, I just
and it also talks about I'm forgetting the word. I don't know why, but I guess just it's on TV. But it talks about just slowly eating and thinking about our hunger and fullness cues and things like that.
That's interesting because I don't remember that in previous food guides.
Exactly.
Or even from when learning in school about the food pyramid and stuff.
Yeah.
And I don't remember even the order of which it all went. But I don't remember eating noting your hunger cues and how you eat, the pace you eat, the preparation. I don't remember that being any part of the dialogue back then. So that's new and interesting.
Yes, and I think it's really, some of those things are really embedded in traditional ways as well, if you think about it. So, just eating together, like at feasts and stuff, right? So I'm hoping that in the new guide, the new Indigenous guide, they, talk about some of those kinds of traditional ways of living and eating, right? But yeah, so those are some things that I really like about it, the new Canada's Food Guide.
What would be some of, your clientele, what is the, what would be kind of the hardest push about this new guide to people? What are people most reluctant when you say, here's how you could be, what do you get the most pushback on?
I think the main thing is, I think eating fruits and vegetables, I think, is sort of...
It's the quantity of them, right? Like,
yeah,
you look at this, and it's like, of course I eat fruits and vegetables. Of course I do. But you look at the quantity.
Yeah.
And it might seem like much to some people.
Yeah, to some people, definitely. And so I kind of just tell people, as much as you can put on there, do your best type of thing, because we really do have to work with what we have. Not everyone's going to be able to follow this, this healthy plan that is set out there. So...
Another thing that was mentioned in this one is water.
Yeah.
I don't remember seeing that as much emphasis on that. And this is saying your drink of choice should be water.
Yes.
Not fruit juices, not milk. And a lot of lactose intolerant Indigenous people would look at this new food guide and think, wow, I wish I knew that a while ago. I would have spared myself a lot of agony and discomfort. Tea, I think, I had seen in there too. Is that right?
I don't know if I saw that, but tea does help with our water intake, so I would say that could be in there as well.
So more water, more tea.
I also really like just the way that the plate is now versus kind of the rainbow, right? So I think people it's easier to kind of look at your meal rather than a whole day of foods. Like all the serving sizes before, I think were kind of confusing for people.
Right.
And understanding how much they need in a whole day. And so if you're looking at your plate that you have every meal.
Oh, we're seeing it up there now.
Yeah, it's a lot easier to, I think, understand. And it gives you a bit of flexibility too, I think.
Yeah. So I'm assuming you hear from a lot of people saying, I can't afford to eat better. What do you recommend to people who are living on low income, fixed income? How can they eat healthier?
Yeah, so like I said, we have to kind of work with what we have now, right? So I use a lot of tips like, just try to get some nutrition into what you're buying, right? And so if people are buying things like Kraft Dinner, it doesn't have no nutrition in it, but it's typically higher in salt and things like that. And so if we can maybe add some frozen vegetables to that and make it a little bit more nutritious, maybe it's not going to fill half of your plate, but even if you can add a little bit in there, it's doing something, right? And so little changes like that do add up. Another example is adding beans to, like, if a lot of people seem to buy like canned beef stew, and so if you're adding beans to that, you're getting some more fiber and some more protein in there, right?
And that could be for any soup too, right? If you're stocking up on the cheap soup at the grocery store, grab just cans of beans.
Yeah, some more beans and vegetables in there. So those are some ways to do that with some of the staple foods that are cheaper. There are some foods that I think we can switch to. Again, change is just hard, but for example, white bread and brown bread are generally the same price wherever you buy them, if they're the same brand. And so just choosing sort of the healthier option, like the whole wheat version, you're getting more fiber and you're going to feel more full. So you're getting more nutrition bang for your buck, really, right?
Does it matter about fresh food? I mean, I know I was, as a single mom living on a very low fixed income, I remember having to get a little craftier about how you eat. And thinking, so you go to the grocery store and it's not with your list necessarily. You're seeing what's on sale and you shop based on that. So, and lots of times that means what's in season, what's up here now that you can, whether it be broccoli or turnips or whatever. Is there, so in addition to shopping seasonally, like for seasonally in season fruits and vegetables, is there a difference between canned fruits or frozen fruits or dried fruits? Does it matter? If whatever's on sale, can you rank them in terms of fresh, frozen, preserved?
So I usually say, if you can buy locally, or, if you can grow a garden or pick berries, that's great. So in season local things. But of course we live in Canada and that's not always possible.
Right.
And so often the fruits and vegetables that are fresh, that come from far away, from a different country, for example, if they've come this far, they actually lose some of their nutrition when they're coming here. And so then if you think about it going up north, for example, it's even traveling further.
Yeah.
And so you might hear that complaint quite a bit, that the food up there isn't the best quality, like the fresh fruits and vegetables. And a lot of people do think that that is the healthiest way, right? But if those things are losing their nutrients, then it is actually better to choose the frozen or canned fruits and vegetables.
Right.
Because they're frozen at their peak nutrition when they're picked. And so they have all that nutrition in them still, and so they're even cheaper. So if we can buy those, then those are really good.
That's a good tip. I hope people are paying attention to that.
Yes, I hope so. The only
file that
thing
one away.
with the canned, of course, is that they're usually canned in higher sodium things. There usually are options with no salt added, so you can look for that. But I know in a lot of communities up north especially, they don't have those options. And so I have to use lots of tips like rinsing them out so that you're getting some of that salt out of there, right?
Or the sugar that there, because a lot of the fruit is in a light syrup or something, right? So you rinse it off.
Yeah, you can rinse it off.
Hopefully you have access to clean drinking water where you are, which is not the case in most of our, or in a lot of our communities. Okay, so I want to take a little trip back in time. Speaking of eating in the north, in 2014, APTN Investigates Kathleen Martins blew the lid off of eating in Canada's north. Her story became fodder in the House of Commons after it aired, and it was revealed that people were scavenging in the dump because they couldn't afford food in their community, despite governments spending multi-millions of dollars a year on food subsidy programs. Let's take a look at that, a clip from that, or a promo from that.
Stuff like that.
Tutanawek says it's the Inuit way to share this country food and to give it to someone in need if they ask for it.
You can see that. You can see right there. There's frozen caribou meat, like caribou legs, trout, char.
Here we find the fruit and vegetables Weeb can't afford to feed her own family. This is a box of Fresh Express veggies. There are all these packaged veggies, 50% off with dip. Actually looks like pretty good. Veggie cup with ranch dip in there. That's a lot of bananas. Like, that could make
banana bread. If I put it on Facebook, in less than 5 minutes, there'll be lots of people coming here racing with a Honda.
okay.
I remember when that show aired, I was working for APTN Investigates when Kathleen did that story, and I'm just being infuriated because at that point in time, the federal government was spending about $65 million a year on the Nutrition North program, and when you see that amount of food, edible food, going into the garbage, and I, as a taxpayer, going, why aren't we just giving it away? Like, it should be illegal to throw out food. It should be illegal. That is government-purchased, taxpayer-subsidized food. Feed it to people. They shouldn't have to be scavenging in a dump for it. That's just... It outrages me again today when I watch it. Yeah. But there's the problem with you go up north and you want to go and get some of those canned, like those little Dole fruit cups, for example. We see on social media, $16 for a 6-pack of those types of things. So my question to you is, I guess, what would as an observer to how food is consumed in the north and the programs that are up there, is there a way that you could think of that that the program could better serve people up there?
Well, I think
if you were in charge.
Oh boy, that's a well, I think that going back to the food sovereignty, I think maybe letting the communities decide what they need, right? Mm-hmm. And so just going back to, I guess, our foodways, and really, I don't know, they need more money, and just talking with the communities. Each community is going to need something different, right? And so, I guess doing that. Another thing that I can think of, I guess, is even standardizing food costs. So, I guess I don't think that people should be penalized for where they live. So just because they're up north and it costs a bit more to fly foods up there, I don't think that.
Well, and I think most taxpayers, we're spending this money anyways, and the Nutrition North budget now is up to $99 million a year. We're spending this money. Like, to me, I look and say, well, give them free food. I don't even necessarily want some of it subsidized. Give it to them for free. Like, you get your free fruit allotment or vegetable allotment or grains allotment. Like, give it to people. Don't even charge. Don't even subsidize it. And then you can subsidize some of the other, you know, non-essential types of foods. And I don't know why that's not been part of a conversation. I guess because, you know, it's not something that's in most of our lives on a daily. We don't think about eating while you're living in the north, you know.
Yeah.
We have a caller, Arthur from Nova Scotia. He is online, wants to talk about access to, or getting back to traditional foods. Arthur, are you there? Are you there, Arthur? Oh, he's not there. Okay, so we've got, so talks about, are there food cost challenges that you hear about here? Like, I know that there's, like we're in Winnipeg. I shouldn't say just here and expect people to know where we are. We're in Winnipeg. You know, you hear about and social media is filled with, it's impossible to eat well up north because here's the food costs. In urban centers, are there complaints about certain things like meat, for example? Is that something that people have trouble being able to eat? And what advice do you give to people who can't afford some of these higher ticket items?
Mm-hmm. So yes, I think that there are cost issues here as well. I mean, there's urban food deserts as well, right? So, you know, for example, in the north end, there's not a lot of grocery stores, right? And so people often will have to bus with many kids or take a taxi or what have you, right? And so that affects the food costs as well. I guess their total budget, I should say. And and so food, I guess in general, is expensive. And so I think the tips would be sort of the same and buying some of those foods that are more nutritious, more nutrition, like bang for your buck. So if you're looking at an apple and a bag of chips and they're both the same price, like if they're both $1, then the apple is going to give you more fiber and vitamins and minerals and help you to prevent chronic diseases, whereas the chips basically do the opposite, right?
Yeah.
So we can do those types of things and choose foods that are cheaper, like the frozen fruits and vegetables. Beans and lentils are quite cheap, but they're very nutritious for us. And so, of course, there are things that we can do to try and get some of those nutritious things in.
It's just about, like you said, it's a matter of changing how people think about what they're eating. Because, you know, lots of times you think, I have to eat, I'm on a tight budget. So you go somewhere and it's like, oh, they have 99-cent frozen pizzas. Well, there's nothing, you know, nutritional about it. It fills the void for 99 cents. But, you know, that's not, you're not doing yourself any favors by eating at 99 cents.
Yeah, other things too, like just in general, planning your meals, right? So things like that, where you can plan meals for your whole family before you go shopping, and so you're maybe not going to choose those foods that that aren't the best for us, but they're kind of tempting at the time, right?
Yeah.
And so if you have your budget and you've been to the store many times, you kind of know how much things cost. You can find meals that are more nutritious at a lower cost and plan for those, right?
I'd like to go shopping with you. That's just maybe that's something we need to do. Next time we're going to go shopping with Kayla, and she'll tell us how to fill our carts on the cheap with healthy stuff. Okay, it's time for us to take another quick break, but when we come back, an Indigenous woman who took her diet into her own hands, started a gardening project to combat failing health, and we have the one and only Art Napoleon of APTN's Moose Meat and Marmalade. He's joining us to talk about a new twist on old ways of eating. Stay with us. Hello, welcome back. We are going to go now to John in Thunder Bay, who we have on the line. He's called in. John, are you there?
Hi.
Hey, John. How are you?
Good. There was a town hall by Don Rusnak. He's our local MP for Thunder Bay, and it was basically what the federal government should do when it comes to I guess, food sovereignty, I guess, or the food system. And I thought, why not put food or price equalization into the pricing for food? Like the person in Toronto would pay the same as the person up in Cat Lake or Moose Factory or wherever in the specific province. Like someone in Churchill, Manitoba would pay the same price as someone in downtown Winnipeg.
Yeah.
I mean, food's an essential part of being human. You need food. So why, I mean, who's getting rich when you charge like $50 for 2-pound clamshell of strawberries?
Well, it's interesting. And what was some of the feedback that you heard? Was there a willingness to look at something like that?
I spoke with Mr. Rusnak about 8 months after that, and the Liberal Party just withdrew its plans. They didn't want to do anything. So I don't know if that was just to get fake feedback. I don't know.
That wouldn't be the first stunt pulled by government. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks for that, John. I'm going to go now. We've got Audrey Logan in studio here. She's a Métis gardener who uses traditional agriculture practices. She has a self-sustaining garden here, and she's used that knowledge to help develop a public garden here in Winnipeg. Let's take a quick look at what Audrey's got going on here.
Novice gardener Yusef Debir wanted to get back to nature. Debir found Clinic Garden in West Broadway, run by land steward Audrey Logan, who has been working with plants most of her life. The style of gardening at this site has evolved over the years, with Logan taking over in 2014 to create a permaculture site.
Some people look at it, the garden as a bit messy, but it's very diverse.
What's different about this garden is how little it needs to be watered.
We have some old barrels and some old pipes in the sense of flipping one to the other, and we've only used that water, but there again we use it as medicinal water.
That means certain plants are put in the water to fortify it, adding potassium and phosphorus to help the plants grow. At Clinic Garden, you won't find anyone raking or hoeing.
We split the soil to where we put straw and leaves and humus material, and then took that excess soil and put it over top.
Logan says the garden is thriving with blooms, beans, and berries.
They are delicious. I think you should have one too.
Logan uses the garden as an opportunity to share her knowledge for free.
Because you need to touch, feel, smell. You have to be able to be tactile with the earth and with the plants to know it.
She hopes people take what they learn and apply it to their own gardens.
Joining us on the phone now is the one and only Art Napoleon, one half of APTN's hit show Moose Meat and Marmalade. He is Cree Dane's hunter, he's a forager, he's an adventurous outdoor cook. He combines his knowledge of plants and wildlife to showcase Indigenous foods and cooking techniques while remembering that responsibility is key to the relationship with natural foods from the earth. Welcome, Art.
Wow, you know me better than
I know,
myself.
Right? I've been Instagram stalking you for a long time. I love what you cook and what you post. So I'm curious. I want to talk to you and Audrey both about just this love of food that's from the earth and what inspires you guys each day with what you forage for, what you harvest. Art, what gets you excited about your food?
Well, it all started out with just love of food and having to be inventive as a kid on the res, and summer holidays are long and you're kind of bored, so you learn to be inventive when you have a low budget, when you come from a low income family.
Yeah.
And so we had one channel and I'd see these commercials in black and white TV of like Dairy Queen commercials, and I had no idea what a frickin' banana split was. And since you can't see the colors, you're kind of guessing what they're putting on that creamy ice cream, and so you take a guess and you just start creating. So I would pick berries and pick rhubarb from the garden and just start inventing stuff, and that's how it started. But only in recent years have I really started thinking it more in terms of food sovereignty and food security. Mm-hmm. And that's that's how I see it now. It's through those eyes.
So, and Audrey, I understand it was for health reasons that you started looking at going, I need to get back to the basics of plant-based foods, but it wasn't just a regular garden that you have. You've got like an Indigenous twist to yours. So what inspired you to go that way, aside from just the health benefits of it? And how do you even know how to do it, would be my follow-up question.
Well, as a homeless youth from CFS, taking care of backyard gardens in Edmonton was a means of food for myself. And I was laying in bed back in 2004 at 310 pounds and with diabetes going, my doctor says I got to eat this, and I've got $4 a day for food from disability to get that, and that's not possible. So accessing through Good Food Club, food right from farmers, and then I figured, well, I had some issues with legalities of having traditional foods on city properties and such, because many of our foods are on the noxious weed list and invasive species list as well. So finding access to that has been a challenge, but luckily I was able to get land stewardship of that property there at Clinic.
What are some of the things you grow?
A variety of foods, zucchinis, raspberries. We're trying to give a little taster of everything, because we can't feed everyone off of that little piece of land, but anyone walking through is allowed to pick whatever they need from there. So we ask people in the community as they're walking by the year before, saying, well, would you like to see this year?
Yeah.
So we introduce, cucumbers and other things and such, but we try and steer them more towards the Good Food Club, where they can have access to very well-priced foods that are right from the farm, so they're not from a store aspect. But
I'm sure something that you hear too, people who are fans of the show, it's like, I love the idea of traditional foods. How do you tell people to, how do you get traditional food? If you're landlocked in a city, how do you eat traditionally?
Well, I managed to do it by through a number of means. I think if there's a will, there's a way. You got to be creative, and of course, you got to know food. You got to know how to forage. Like in the city of Victoria, there's all kinds of parks and green spaces where there's wild blackberries growing, and a lot of things that can be harvested. Berry shoots in the springtime, salmonberry shoots and whatnot are all available, actually quite abundant. But everything happens seasonally, so you got to kind of lock into the territory that you're living in and start getting to know the seasons of things. And you also have to know how not to poison yourself.
That seems like important, how to not poison yourself, especially with those BC mushrooms you've got going out there, Art.
Yeah, avoid the dog pee areas too, yeah, for sure. Find a clean spot to do your foraging in. And then I supplement that with going home to my territory and doing my hunting and berry picking up there as well, enough to fill a little freezer anyway. So between foraging around the city and hunting back home on the res and bringing it back to the city to feed my friends and family, that's how I'm able to do it.
So what advice would you offer to somebody who's looking and going, I live off of what I can find in a department store, but I want to get away from that. I want to get eating better, traditionally, more off the land. What advice do you give them? How do you get started in doing that?
Talk to local foragers. There's if you come from even a big town, small city, you can find people online that do foraging. Like mushroom picking is really big. It's highly competitive here on the island. So make friends with a mushroom picker and learn about the different mushrooms and when to go out and look for them. And there's other foragers too. And there's also around here there's a lot of youth leading Indigenous food sovereignty movements, and they have events where all the plant people and foragers and fishermen and hunters, they all kind of gather to talk about what they can do, and they usually hold demonstrations and have feasts. And so wherever you are, I'm sure there's some kind of little movement like that. So tap into those people. And the other thing is, if you can't find wild game, obviously there's things that can be substituted. A lot of red meat is actually kind of similar. If it comes from an ungulate, there's not really a lot of difference in cooking, like, say, an elk and a bison.
Yeah.
Moose is a little different. It's drier, and you got to think of different methods. But
and the almighty caribou, the king of all red meats.
Yeah, caribou's pretty cool.
Oh, my favorite. Well, thanks for taking the time to join us. We're pretty much running out of time here, so I'll have to let you go back here to Audrey. I want to just give you one last quick moment, Audrey, to say, what advice would you give to somebody who wants to start a garden and you don't have a lot of space, you don't have a lot of money?
Just come on down to the garden at 545 Broadway. We're going to be showing how to do...
That's in Winnipeg.
We'll be doing milk jug gardening or showing how to start seeds outdoors naturally. And when it comes to food and foraging, knocking on doors, there's tons of fruit trees in our city that are going to waste.
Yeah.
And I knock on doors. I got cherries, pears, apples, grapes.
You can, I would say too, a lot of times on Kijiji, like there's a lot of like on social media, or there's lots of opportunities
for preserving, dehydration. That's how our people preserved our food, and we didn't have to use salt, sodium, sugars, or anything like that. Very tasty, too.
Awesome. We're all out of time. Thank you so much to our guests. That's it for our show today. And to listeners on Element Radio in Toronto and Ottawa, and of course our viewers, thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you back here next week. Have a great Wednesday.